Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all, whether you're watching this stream on YouTube or on Rumble. And I'm very happy today to have with me Dan Cohen. He is a brilliant investigative journalist. And offline, I was telling him that I'm ashamed of not having him earlier on the show. His work, especially on different cases, in the Palestine case and also on the Syrian case, is unparalleled, and he's also publishing for Uncaptured News. I will put all the links in the description below, guys, so you can follow him. I see that many people already know him, but for those who is not familiar with his work, you should go and follow his work on X. Dan, thank you so much for coming to the show. It's really a pleasure.
Absolutely. The pleasure is mine, Kevork. Thanks for having me.
I'm very happy to have you on this show today because we're going to speak about the ceasefire agreement in Gaza and its repercussions on the Palestinian people, on the region. And just at the beginning, I want to make a disclaimer. I'm going to try to play the devil's advocate sometimes to bring different opinions into this discussion, especially from the people's perspective. I'm not going to share what the pundits say because the pundits say what who is paying for the pundits, right? But I'm seeing different reactions from different people, including Palestinians, Lebanese, and Syrians, especially particularly the people of the region. Now, we have, after months of onslaught against the Palestinians, and probably the death toll is above the 100,000 of civilian casualties. Big portion of them are underage kids and women. In these conditions, we have a ceasefire agreement, which Hamas is not destroyed. Basically, we've seen them with convoys and with full gear and parading in the city. The hostages were not released with military force like Netanyahu promised. However, at the same time, Gaza is completely destroyed. We're speaking about an enclave that doesn't have any infrastructure left. The medical system has collapsed, education system, energy, fuel, gas, sanitation, everything basically is destroyed there. And we have tens of thousands of Palestinians killed, plus tens of thousands injured. And now that the people finally say, okay, we have a ceasefire agreement, but where to go? Where to go in the Gaza Strip where everything is destroyed? So in your opinion, how do you evaluate these different components of this conflict starting from October 7th till today? Some people call it a big victory for the Palestinians, and others say we have to be cautious what's going to come next.
Yeah, this is a big question that deserves a careful examination and consideration, and there are so many components. I mean, before October 7th, I think the basic equation between Israel and the Palestinians, and in particular Gaza, was that Israel had an incredible capacity to destroy. And that is still the case, as we see. Yes. Gaza is obliterated. While at the same time, Gaza has an incredible ability to resist. And those two truths have not fundamentally changed. We have seen those, they're almost axiomatic. The thing is, Israel's ability to destroy, to be so destructive, is completely dependent on the United States, on sponsorship from a foreign power, which is not a very good equation for the long term. It
Yes.
only depends on the good graces, if you would call it that, or the influence, or however you might describe it, of the Israel lobby, of Israel in the United States. And you can't take that for granted forever. So now Gaza is obliterated. Israel has achieved none of its stated goals. The only thing it did really was obliterate Gaza. I mean, its stated goals at the beginning, actually at the beginning, the stated goals, the captives or hostages, retrieving them or rescuing them, was not among Netanyahu's 5 stated goals. It wasn't until many days later that Netanyahu even mentioned the hostages and said, "Yeah, we have to get all of them." And of course, the refrain became military pressure will compel Hamas to release the hostages, which was an obvious lie from the beginning and was proven all this time. I mean, they completely obliterated Gaza, and that did not compel Hamas to unilaterally release the hostages, to just give them up. It was only through agreement, and the vast majority of the hostages or captives that have been released from captivity in Gaza have been as a result of negotiations. The few operations that Israel carried out successfully to get its captives back from Gaza, there were very few that came at immense cost to Palestinian life, especially. But Israel got fewer of its hostages back by military operations than it killed by military operations, which, many of us, I think, correctly describe as the Hannibal Directive, because it became clear at the beginning that once Hamas has an Israeli in captivity, well, that Israeli is now an asset of Hamas. It can be used for leverage and bargaining. And so if you want to weaken Hamas, you get rid of the captive. And so that is the logic that was, I reported back in, I think, December or January, early January of 2024, about how Netanyahu had, since October 8th, had been plotting secretly and conniving to prevent any kind of exchange, and really waged a very complicated and deceptive psychological war against the families of the captives that were, almost all of them were pressuring Netanyahu to make a ceasefire, even and exchange, even if temporary. But of course, Netanyahu knew that if there was going to be a major ceasefire, that would imperil the possibility of completely obliterating Gaza, and the right wing would not like that. So, but it became eventually that the two main goals, stated goals for Israel, was to defeat Hamas and get the captives back, which are totally contradictory, because the only way to get the captives back is to negotiate with Hamas. And if you're going to destroy them, well, you can't negotiate with them. So I think Israel has taken a big loss in this war by the end of this genocide. It achieved none of its stated goals. All it did was humiliate itself and destroy its international image and all of the goodwill that it had from the so-called international community on October 7th, when everyone saw these horrible images of people being dragged into Gaza and this and that, and the US and Europe and the so-called civilized world all sympathized with Israel so much, and it wasted all of that. It burned all of that in committing this genocide. And now I think it's going to be more isolated, especially from, for example, Russia, from China, who maybe haven't taken as strong of positions as many of us would like on the international stage at the UN Security Council, but they have their own national interests to protect. But I think this does not bode well for Israel. And despite the incomprehensible suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza, I think time is on their side in a way, in terms of
you think the time is on the side of the Palestinians?
I mean, I think the road to liberation is long and arduous, but the light at the end of the tunnel became a bit closer, a bit brighter, and knowing that is with the full force of Israel, the United States, the European Union, all of its backing, all of its weapons, everything could not defeat Gaza. They obviously scored a major victory with collapsing Syria, which I'm sure we'll get into. But I mean, this tiny strip of land that is thousands of times smaller than the combined landmass of Israel and the United States and Europe and all of its backers, no matter what, with their full force, they couldn't defeat Gaza. And they were forced to conform to the reality that Gaza will be governed by the Palestinians of Gaza, and they cannot be set aside. They cannot be dictated what they're. You can blockade them, you can besiege them, you can do all kinds of things to them, but they will not control inside Gaza. And so I think to maintain that bit of sovereignty represents an important victory that will have major consequences going forward in ways that none of us can predict or imagine.
So basically, Israeli occupation forces, they couldn't capture Gaza. I mean, this was the plan all the way, to capture Gaza and then resettle them with the illegal settlers. They couldn't reach, let's say, this point. However, there is a counter argument which says maybe, just maybe, the goal was to commit genocide in Gaza and get away with it, because Israel already destroyed the Palestinian people as an ethnic group in part or in whole in the Gaza Strip. We're talking like no standing building. So basically, Israel destroyed their hope. Who is going to come and reconstruct Gaza? This is not mentioned in the ceasefire agreement. Who is going to rule Gaza? This is not mentioned in the ceasefire agreement. So the counter argument here is, yes, Hamas survived, but the Palestinian people paid a huge price. And there is no popularity now among the Palestinian people to do something like October 7 once again, because they don't want to leave this hell one more time. So this could be like a lesson to the Palestinians not to think about doing anything like October 7 again, and just keep them in an open air prison, subjugated under an Israeli rule. And there are other scenarios that is possible if the Israelis don't allow reconstruction and there is not enough food and medication, and people will start, who are they going to fight against if there is no occupation forces? There could be internal strife in Gaza itself. Like people may run against Hamas or Islamic Jihad for not being able to secure the basic necessities. I mean, you mentioned Syria. In the past 2 years, the Syrian government was the popularity of the Syrian government was in its minimum levels because it wasn't able to feed the people, not because it didn't fight for the people. It did fight for the people for 10 years or 12 years, but then in the past 2 years, it couldn't feed the people because of the outside sanctions and the inside corruption, right? So this could be a situation for Netanyahu that he wants to suffocate the Palestinians and not allow reconstruction in order to push them into desperation. And desperation, then people will blame someone at the end, and this is going to be Hamas.
So I think the genocide was certainly a goal for a large swath of the Israeli population. Of course, the right wing that is completely bent on extermination, and is perfectly fine to be completely internationally isolated. But for the sort of power structure, the Israeli establishment, I don't think that genocide is I want to be careful. It's not to exculpate them, but it's not that they want their state to survive and they want to normalize. And the genocide and the conditions in Gaza make that more difficult in a way. And I think that's actually one of the big reasons that the genocide was, that there is this, at least stage one of the ceasefire so far. And, of course, the United States has pushed normalization very strongly, not only with Saudi Arabia, which is, the goal to normalize with Saudi Arabia, but also, with the UAE, with Morocco. I mean, this is a big policy of the Trump administration, and Israel needs to have strong international trade, needs to normalize in the region for its own survival and economic well-being into the future. This is the whole vision that has been presented, and that's one of the reasons, actually, that October 7th happened, because it was made clear by the Abraham Accords, by Netanyahu's speech at the UN, that the whole idea was that they believed they could sidestep the Palestinian issue altogether and just ignore it. And so there was no political track for Hamas and the Palestinian resistance to resolve the conflict, for lack of a better term, to obtain their rights. And so without any political track and the prospect of normalization coming, it's basically they decided, well, we have to force ourselves into the conversation, and no, we will not be forgotten. We will not be ignored or sidestepped. Israel has to deal with the Palestinian issue. And so I think now the ceasefire symbolizes the recognition, in particular by Donald Trump, that that's true. Because one of the things Trump has openly said is one of the big reasons for the ceasefire that he forced on Netanyahu is so Israel can normalize with Saudi Arabia. And so I don't want to be overly rosy and optimistic in my appraisal that, now Gaza is free and everything is great. Obviously, the conditions there are just beyond anything that we on the outside can imagine. But I think it's absolutely true that Gaza has bent the will of the United States and Israel and Europe to and the GCC, for that matter, to say, no, you cannot forget about us. You cannot just simply ignore us. And I don't think they will be ignored going forward. I'm hoping that the Trump administration will have a different policy than complete domination, allowing itself to be dominated by the Israel lobby, which it did in Trump's first term. I mean, the simple fact that Trump pressed for forced Netanyahu to accept this ceasefire, I don't know when the last time. I mean, I think you would have to go back decades and decades to look for, maybe back to the time of the first Bush administration to find a moment where the United States actually dictated what Israel must do, because that is the real nature of the relationship, is that the U.S. pays Israel. Israel doesn't pay the U.S. So for Trump to actually assert that after the Biden and Obama administrations and the last Trump administration, where Israel basically got everything it wanted, dictated everything, it's like being in complete darkness, and then Trump forcing Netanyahu to sign the ceasefire agreement is like a little crack of light in this darkness in my mind.
Yeah.
And it suggests there could be something coming that's different. And Netanyahu may have this vision like, look, what's going to happen if he really thinks, okay, I'm going to make peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians we're going to have a Palestinian state, we're going to rebuild Gaza, we're going to have some kind of economy there, and then Israel can normalize and I'll have made peace in the Middle East. I think he will find some surprises, namely that the Israeli political climate is not conducive to that. Netanyahu will try to sabotage and subterfuge him at every point, and he will realize, as he actually did even in his first term, that Netanyahu is a big problem, that this is not someone, this is not your ally. This is, when he names a settlement, Ramat Golan, or Ramat Trump, after you, and, pats you on the back and this kind of thing, this guy is a snake. He's waiting to stab you in the back. So I'm hoping that Trump, in his sort of nationalist mindset, will start to see that and will impose more on Israel. And because the Israeli political climate, especially after October 7th, is so deranged and right-wing, and is perfectly happy to be isolated and say, to the hell with the United States. We don't need them. We have God, all of these things. That will create more of a rupture between Israel and the United States. I don't want to speculate, but this is kind of this is the general equation that I see.
The thing for Trump is he has considerable number of, let's say, right-wing. I don't like to call people right or left. Those self-proclaimed right-wing, let's say, influencers or journalists or activists who have big platforms, some of which are very anti-Israel. and they support Trump at the same time. There is considerable, let's say, popular base among the Trump supporters are anti-Israel for their own reasons, some of which is only hatred towards the Jewish people, some of which are, no, Israel is not our ally, they have destroyed our, they have killed our soldiers, they have plotted on 9/11. There are so many things that they speak about. They say Israel doesn't serve the interests of the United States. I personally do not see the situation from the point of view that it's Israel serving the United States or the United States is serving Israel. No, I see there is an empire which people do not really recognize because it doesn't have its clear borders the way it was in the past. However, this empire has 800 military bases around the world. It has its NGOs, it has its own politicians, it has journalists, it has unlimited money to pay, basically, to many people, intellectual class, academia, etc., etc., etc. So in this case, I see that Israel is instrumental in the U.S. foreign policy objectives in the region. It is important for the U.S. to have a country like Israel in the region to keep the country, to keep the region the way it is, in stability. And this has been the strategy of the US since the 60s, 70s, divide and conquer the region. Now that Trump is coming and he has a bigger file at hand, which is this defense pact with Saudi Arabia, probably I'm saying there is a plot behind this ceasefire agreement, and that is they have to give a window of they have to present a new climate in the region where the spotlight is not on Israel, but rather on different cases. And for Saudi Arabia not to be embarrassed when they sign the pact with the United States, because one of the conditions of the pact is that Saudi Arabia has to normalize ties with Israel. So in these circumstances, I'm just being like, critical, let's say, for the optimism. and I see, like, if Saudi Arabia normalizes ties with Israel, Egypt, Jordan out, Syria is out. Foreign Minister of HDS says considers Israel a country, which since 1963, Syria, and there was no Syrian diplomat calling Israel a country. They always called it a Zionist entity, and the wording means that they recognize Israel. So in this climate, I see Hezbollah has been more like localized, like we're a resistance, but for Lebanon for now, because the popular base of Hezbollah are also very tired, especially after the assassinations that happened in the country and their towns were destroyed. So I see the Palestinians are left alone, basically, in Gaza. And in this case, they will weaponize foreign aid. They will say, okay, we, the Saudis, we, the Emiratis, we, the Qataris, we are the rich people. We're going to reconstruct your country, but you have to give some compromises. And in this case, I personally do not see the two-state solution as a viable option. I don't think that there is a way for the Arabic countries to revive the two-state solution. It's practically impossible in this geopolitical climate, and also with the acceleration of settlement building in West Bank, which Jared Kushner says he will, there is some term used, turbocharging settlement building in the West Bank. So it seems like the ethnic cleansing is ongoing, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. So in this case, I'm really fearful that they would try to start some sort of a militant uprising in the Sinai for the Egyptian army to drag into a conflict and press Sisi. I'm not defending Sisi here, but I always say being an ally of the United States, it means nothing, because if they need more from you, they will destabilize even your country to get more. And in this case, it's the only place where they can push 2 million Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip. This is the only place. So I don't know if I'm optimistic. I'm really... my heart bleeds when I see the footage coming from Gaza and I see the celebration. I'm happy that the people survived the genocide, but I'm very, very cautious. I'm very worried about the Palestinian case. And when I remember, look, sorry for this long follow-up. 100 years ago, there was 1.5 million Armenians living in Eastern Anatolia. And now it's around 0. right? My grandparents basically used to live in that area, and when there was a genocide and they fled, now 100 years ago, nobody speaks about the Armenian presence in Eastern Anatolia. And in the last year, 120,000 Armenians were ethnically cleansed from Karabakh. So if other powers can do it, Israel thinks it can also do something like this, especially with this complete protection from the US, different European countries. It's like a carte blanche, like giving them the no red lines, go commit genocide. And I don't want to call her name now. One foreign minister in Europe says, a hospital loses its protection if there is a Hamas militant inside. That's a BS, because if there is a Hamas militant injured inside the hospital, he should receive medical treatment. But if a Hamas militant operative is on the hospital and firing rockets from the hospital, and you can document that, you can present a proof if that is the case, and they couldn't do that. But what I'm trying to say is, they don't care about the Palestinians. They don't care about the people of the region. There is the money, there is the weapons in their hands, and they're determined. Like, they were so determined. I was, since the Iraq war, I couldn't come to the conclusion that there is a psychopathic mentality behind this policy, that they don't see the people as equal human beings, right? Like, kill them as many as you can. They're like flies. We have a project. We need to normalize ties with Saudi Arabia. What are you talking about? 200,000 Palestinians, 300,000 Palestinians? They don't care. So I'm not really optimistic per se. And I just wanted to do this follow-up because I feel a little bit down, especially after the fall of Syria, that I think that the Palestinians lost also Syria as a strategic depth for their struggle for justice in the region.
I think, yes, it's important to be sort of measured and not be, neither overly optimistic nor overly pessimistic, because there are so many factors at play and everything is just unpredictable. And so in general, I try to avoid sort of speculation, and not to say that that's what you're doing or we're doing here. We're just trying to kind of assess the
Yes.
given moment, the current moment,
Yeah.
and try to figure out what may happen going forward, and what is the significance of this moment. I mean, part of I mean, as I was saying before, in terms of, you said you don't think there's a possibility of a two-state solution, which I agree, and I think there may be some I don't know if there will be recognition of that going forward, but of course Israel has made sure that, I don't think the two-state solution was ever a possibility.
Yes.
nor was it let alone a just resolution to the Palestinian question. But since, for several decades, Israel has systematically, intentionally divided up the West Bank, so there can be no two-state solution. That is the number one goal of the settlement policy in the West Bank, is preventing a two-state solution, and the Israeli public and the political parties that are most prominent are completely against a two-state solution. So I think the more that the West tries to impose this, and you don't see Netanyahu talking about we need to normalize with Saudi Arabia and these kinds of things. He's busy talking to his right-wing base and trying to appeal to Smotrich and these kinds of guys, he's openly saying, and his journalists, his propagandists are openly saying that there's not going to be, we're actually going to defeat Hamas, and we're going to there's not going to be a real ceasefire. We're going to go back. The war is going to continue. I think these are the kinds of things that could sort of rupture further kind of challenge or I don't know. I don't want to say slowly, and I don't want to say completely rupture, but could damage the U.S.-Israel relationship, because the U.S. is so, Trump, I think, could be a bit naive in the sense that he thinks he can make a deal between Israel and the Palestinians, but as long as Israel has its national ideology of Zionism, then it's not going to be able to make a peace deal. It is like psychologically incapable of making a deal with the Palestinians, and so this could be one of the kind of the chicken bone that gets caught in the throat of this attempt to do so. And if say Israel wants to ethnically cleanse, and the U.S. Wants to allow Israel to ethnically cleanse Gaza into the Egyptian Sinai. For one thing, that was already the plan after October 7th. I published an article in November of 2023 where I found a proposal published in the Pentagon's top journal, written by an Israeli right-wing think tank figure named Omer Dostri, who actually ended up going on to become Netanyahu's spokesperson. So
I know him. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this article, this proposal, again published in the U.S. military's top journal, called for the complete destruction the destruction of Gaza, the destruction of Lebanon, and basically to put Palestinians in Gaza into basically small concentration camps, population centers, to be under complete Israeli military occupation, and to ethnically cleanse the majority of them into the Egyptian Sinai. And there was open talk about that in Israeli political circles and the government and society, that we're having the Nakba 2.0.
Yes.
I think Avi Dichter called it, who was a top Israeli official.
When they speak about Nakba 2.0, it reminds me of the comments I receive from the genocide deniers of the Armenian genocide, where they tell me, it never happened, but we will do it again. The Nakba never happened when you discuss this type of people, but then they say this is the Nakba 2.0. So it either happened or it didn't happen, right?
Right. Yeah. It didn't happen, and we're going to do it again.
Yeah.
So they tried to force the Palestinians to go to Egypt, and it did not work for a combination of reasons. There was never any, mass rush of Palestinians in Gaza to the Egyptian border trying to get over. If they really wanted to, they would have tried to climb over, and either maybe the Egyptian army would have opened fire on them, or I don't know, or maybe they would have overwhelmed it. But it didn't happen. The Palestinians were so rooted in Gaza that they refused to leave. And they saw the Israeli officials were openly talking about Nakba 2.0. Let alone, of course, Egypt does not want that. As much as Egypt collaborates with Israel, that's against their national interests. So my point in saying this is, I think there may be all kinds of, plans that the imperialist think tanks may come up with to imagine, oh, here's what we're going to do in Gaza. We're going to ethnically cleanse a lot of them, and the ones who stay, we'll keep them in little camps. All their plans are worth nothing now. It's all on paper. On paper, it's one thing, but in reality, it's a different thing. So I was, quite, I don't know. There's emotional doing this work. There are kind of emotional ups and downs, and it's a very kind of heady thing. It's very psychologically intense. And when Syria collapsed, that HTS offensive, that was shocking for me. And it's you go through this period of hyper normalization in your mind, and that's that's another part of the equation. But I mean, I think that all of these plans that they've come up with, say they try to destabilize, ethnically cleanse Egypt, or they try to, right now, what's happening in the West Bank is there are major settler attacks that have happened right now. Obviously, the Israeli security services have basically sanctioned them, allow them to happen, because they could easily stop them. Now, Bezalel Smotrich, in particular, has openly presented a plan to ethnically cleanse the West Bank, what he called the subjugation plan in 2017. Yes. He presented this plan. Palestinians have three options. They can either declare their loyalty to the state of Israel as non-citizens. They can leave, and we will help them leave voluntarily. Or if they choose to resist, we will kill them. This is what he presented. Now,
Yes.
if he tries to impose this, which is a process that is already ongoing in the West Bank, this is not as if it's a yes or no thing. It's already happening. There are before October 7th, for years before, there have been constant settler attacks on the West Bank, terrorist attacks with the intention of terrorizing people to leave. Now, if this becomes at a much higher level and there is an open ethnic cleansing of the West Bank, then where will those Palestinians go? They're certainly not going to be allowed to go into Israel
They will
proper.
destabilize Jordan. They will destabilize Jordan in this case. That's why there is
Precisely.
HTS now.
Precisely. They would destabilize Jordan. And if Jordan falls, I mean, Jordan is already, the population is mostly Palestinians.
It's a paper tiger.
Exactly.
Jordan would fall in a matter of days. 60% of them are Palestinians, right?
Exactly. So this would destabilize the whole thing. And Israel relies on Egypt and Jordan doing at the behest of the U.S., paid by the U.S. And regional proxies to do to basically act as either a barrier against Palestine, to cut off the weapons flow from the Sinai, as much as the Egyptians tried to do that and succeeded in many ways. Or in Jordan to act as a human warehouse for a huge amount of Palestinians so Israel can maintain this artificial demographic majority. If that is destabilized, that is not actually good for Israel's longevity. So I see this as, if they really, like, the next step for Israel is probably to destabilize the West Bank further. That will not actually benefit it in the long run. It's ideologically, they ideologically are committed to this, but in practical terms, it's crazy. So, and this is why I think the U.S. has, in multiple administrations, have imposed this peace process, the so-called peace process, on Israel. It's because, if you stay in this ultra aggressive expansionist mode forever, it's going to be your downfall in a way. So what you have to do is normalize and have a solution that's not actually a solution. And this is what U.S. policymakers, I think, don't really understand about Israel's, that Israel's entire existence is based on expansion and conquest and militarism and war and genocide. So all of those plans on paper may be one thing, and I don't know. I don't see them going as they imagine. The same way as I don't think post October 7th they imagined they would defeat Hamas and everything would be, the PA would take over in Israel and there would be settlements and all these things. And we're in a completely different reality now.
Yeah. One of our commentators say maybe the real goal of Gaza war was to flatter Gaza and have it prepared to rebuild as a Gulf-style hub for tech, money, etc. I don't think they will build it like in the Gulf, but definitely it's the Gulf money which is going to rebuild, and then you will have investments from friendly countries, let's say, to Israel, probably including their spying technologies in Gaza to discover the tunnels of Hamas, just like they did in Lebanon, and they discovered the safe places, basically, of Hezbollah meetings, including 7th floor under the ground. And they have dropped, 80 tons of bombs on Beirut to kill Nasrallah. And this was an intelligence operation. They are weaponizing the telecommunication. They have used even some of the vaccine era programs for Pegasus and they installed St. Pegasus to many of the smartphones in Lebanon. They used AI. They collected enormous amount of information in Lebanon, including WhatsApp messages, texts. When Hezbollah was in Syria, they used to call each other via WhatsApp. They had the what we say the voice fingerprint. Like they don't have to know if somebody is somewhere. They only have to hear his voice because they have saved it all. So I think in this case in Gaza, what the Arabic countries are, or the Gulf countries are going to do, is to invest in the country and put conditions on the Palestinians or on Hamas. They will try to bring back the Palestinian Authority into Gaza. This is a long way for the Palestinians, so we'll keep an eye on this, guys. Let's see how is this going to develop. I don't want to make bold predictions. It's just we're here exchanging ideas and trying to brainstorm about this case. I want to move a little bit to Syria then, the next 15 minutes before we wrap up this. I think this is a very controversial topic among the pro-Palestine camp at the current moment. In your view, like objectively speaking, do you think that the current HTS government would serve the Palestine cause, or does it harm, or we have to wait and see? Because some of the Israeli reports say, no, we have to be fearful of HTS because they have Turkey in their back, and Turkey could declare war on Israel from Syria. So should we wait and see, or it's conclusive that HTS would be beneficial or harmful for the Palestine cause?
Well, I mean, to me, it's completely obvious, and I think to really any honest observer that HTS is simply a proxy of the empire, in particular Turkey. But I mean, it wants good relations with Israel. The HTS foreign minister openly stated that we want good relations with Israel, and then when he was embarrassed by it, he put out a video saying that, oh, no, that's not what I said. And then it turned out there was a recording of him saying exactly that. So, I mean, what has happened since the HTS takeover is Israel has immediately and massively expanded its presence in Syria, occupying more land, more critical land, in particular Mount Hermon, Jabal Sheikh, right? It's called.
Yes.
And expanded its presence well through deeper than ever before. We can only imagine the intelligence assets it has deep in Syria and Damascus and everywhere else. And there's a process of, in a sense, normalization between the two. Where, as you said, the Syrian foreign minister has also said he recognizes Israel as a state. And so it could not be more obvious. Whatever criticisms and weaknesses of the former Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad there were, and there are many,
Yes.
none of that changed the fact that he was adversarial to Israel. He did not have they did not recognize Israel as the new HTS regime does. So the fact that some pro-Palestine people are embracing HTS is shocking, and just I don't even have words for how illogical and crazy this is, because it's like people believe that, oh, HTS is now going to liberate Jerusalem, and HTS declared that its enemies are Iran and Hezbollah, the exact same enemies as Israel. So to me, it's like this whole watching the sort of ideological trajectory and who supports HTS. It's like Sunnis. It's like Zionism for Sunnis.
Yeah.
This is how I see it. And you see, even there's a similar process that happened with the establishment of the State of Israel, where horrible terrorist groups that committed all kinds of heinous atrocities against innocent people were, and many of them foreign, were overnight, with the establishment of the state, transformed into statesmen and David Miller often calls HTS ISIS in suits, the ISIS in suits regime, and this is the same
Yes.
thing that happened with Israel. And so it's a travesty what's happened in Syria, and I feel horrible for, first and foremost, the people of Syria who are now forced to live and be killed under this regime that is openly exterminating, hunting down minorities and anyone associated with the former government, under a total media blackout, where there are just a handful of social media accounts like yourself and a few others who are actually even talking about what's going on in Syria. And there were people who celebrated the fall of Assad, like, oh, they got rid of their dictator, and this is so amazing, and are dead silent as
Yes.
Syrian religious minorities in particular, or Sunnis who are critical of the regime, are being hunted down, imprisoned, and killed. So it's a terrible tragedy.
Yesterday, I posted a tweet on X. I was a little bit harsh, but I was so upset to see this type of commentaries. I said, how utterly twisted does a mind have to believe that the very backers, funders, and arms suppliers enabling Israel's brutal onslaught in Gaza are the same forces whose support for the Julani regime is somehow in the best interest of the Syrian people. And Karim Khan
That's a
of
perfectly
ICC.
reasonable. That's a perfectly reasonable statement. That's not harsh, Kevork. I'm sorry. That's
Yeah.
reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the ICC chief Karim Khan meeting with Jolani.
Right.
I saw the Norwegian foreign minister, and this is the most hilarious thing that in the past weeks. I was not surprised that Western officials are meeting with Jolani, but as if there is a competition who is going to polish Jolani's image in a better way. And the Norwegian foreign minister called him His Excellency Ahmed Shara. And to be honest with you, I'm just being very honest now. I studied diplomatic codes and ethics in the university, but this was like so long ago. So I wanted to check again, and I digged in a little bit into the laws. And there is no like specific law, but there are norms, and you cannot address a rebel leader with His Excellency. His Excellency is for the ambassadors, for the consuls, for the head of states. Somebody who is elected and represents the country. Shara is not yet elected. He is the de facto leader, came to power after a successful insurgency, right? So he's not elected. He doesn't represent the country itself. The flag of the country hasn't changed yet. There has not been a constitutional change in the country, but we're just acting like he's the leader of Syria, and he was just the people elected him, and that we changed the constitution and we're happy with everything. No, that's not the case. And it bothers me because what type of message they're sending to the Syrian people now and to the people in the region overall? Like these Western leaders meeting with Jolani, basically sending the signal and the message to the people, to the youth in the region, telling them, look, if you want to be relevant politically, this is the way. The way is through radical, takfiri, regressive groups like Al-Qaeda, and you have to wage an armed struggle against your own country, and when you come to power, we can rebrand you. This is the type of message they're sending to the youth. So your way is to become, to go into such organizations and join takfiri groups. So basically, they're encouraging more youngsters to be motivated by figures like Abu Muhammad Jolani, whose job was basically sending car bombs into Shia neighborhoods and decapitating people in Gaza. He was the emir of, in Idlib. He was the emir of Idlib. He was the partner of Abu Bakr Baghdadi. So I also find the Western leaders, they share the responsibility for what's happening in the region. And above all, they're preaching us that this is in the package of democracy, human rights, etc., etc. And when you point out to these things, you're still an Assadist. Assad is gone. It's done. Like this chapter is over. Even if he comes back, he will not find supporters now in Syria, especially among the people who supported him. people are despising him for running away. He will not find any support. But we have the right to criticize what Jolani is doing and what Western governments are doing, especially that all these so-called friends of HTS allies are the same allies of Israel at the same time. Sorry, this is a big question mark. And I will not accept, like, I'm receiving some comments now on Syriana Analysis, people telling me, yeah, but what if the majority of Syrians want Jolani? I mean, who says the majority of Syrians want Jolani? And who says the majority of Syrians want an Islamic State? Did you really ask the Syrian people? No, nobody asked their opinion. But Jolani has established himself already the de facto leader. So I'm fearful that this will have a spillover into Jordan, destabilize Jordan, so that if there is an ethnic cleansing project in the West Bank, they would say 60% of Jordan is Palestinians anyway. This is your country. Go and live there. I mean, they have raised these points all over in the past weeks and months anyways.
Right. Yes. I mean, when it's obviously no secret to you as you've been closely observing the Syria crisis since the very beginning, since 2011. I mean, I didn't start following it till 2015 or maybe 2016. But when I review, especially in the last 2 months or so, since the Syria regime change project succeeded finally, I've been reviewing more and more. And for the investigations I did 2 investigations first into the Sednaya prison, and then into the mass graves, which I found that actually HTS was responsible for the most heinous examples of mass graves that I could find in Syria, in eastern Syria near Deir ez-Zor, and also in Idlib province. And even in the southern Damascus neighborhood of Tadamun, there was an HTS mass grave that has been completely overlooked by the same human rights groups, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, all the media outlets that spread all kinds of claims on Syrian government mass graves. And the one example, or the one instance of a Syrian military mass grave that I could find was in Tadamun, and I know about this story, but there was one there, and in the same neighborhood there was one by done by HTS, of course, then called in the early days Jabhat al-Nusra, that has been completely overlooked. There are no human rights investigators or journalists going to investigate that now. So, looking at the unbelievable crimes of Al-Qaeda and ISIS and HTS, the opposition armed groups, to see this completely whitewashed, to see al-Jolani sit down with the ICC prosecutor and say that he is open, that he wants to prosecute former Syrian government officials for crimes and mass graves and these kinds of things, when he is talking to probably one of the foremost, if not the foremost war criminal in Syria, is just incredible. It's just amazing. Yeah,
it's insane.
Exactly. So just the power of propaganda, and this goes completely unchallenged, and just how cynical the US empire and its proxies are. It's just, it fills me with rage, honestly, and I just feel terrible for the people who are forced to live under this lie in this regime.
Look at these photos, guys. This is the Karim Khan with Jolani in Damascus.
So like one example of what Jolani would do, Jolani's men under HTS, what they would do in Idlib province, and also in near Deir ez-Zor. There were 2 mass graves that I found where they would not only take people that they had killed, throw their bodies in there, whether they were Syrian soldiers, Shia civilians, anybody who was suspected of helping the regime, the Assad regime, anything like this. They would also take people and put them in front of these mass graves, like a big pit into the ground.
Yes.
In Idlib province, it was a rock quarry. And in near Deir ez-Zor, it was a natural gorge. They would take people, put a blindfold on them and tell them, "You are free, run for your freedom." And then they would just run to their death.
Shoot.
And they didn't even shoot them. They would just let them fall to their death. Just
Wow.
tell them to run. You know, you're free, go. And put them on the edge, and they would just run to fall in. And this happened in both places, according to the reporting I found. And this is the author of this kind of practice, of beheadings, of mass murder, of sending live people to run for their freedom and fall to their death. This is the guy who, is going to be, exactly. This is the Al-Ahm death hole, they called it, in Idlib province. And I provide the geolocation. And this is sourced from opposition,
Yes.
former anti-government. So this is not Assadist propaganda. This is from people who were living there and did reporting for Western source, with Western money, who were at that time, you could be critical of al-Nusra and the armed opposition. So who knows how many bodies are just sitting in that rock quarry, and it will never be investigated. None of the foreign journalists, the PBS NewsHour, the New York Times, CBS, all of these journalists who are going into Damascus and saying, finally, everyone is free, Sednaya is free.
Yeah.
They won't go to investigate these mass graves. They won't go to Tadamun and see. They'll see the one mass grave of the Assad military, the former Syrian military, but they will definitely not go see the one that al-Nusra ran in Tadamun, where, according to the New York Times, the HTS militants in Tadamun were so brutal that they took an Alawi family and forced the brother to rape his sister.
Oh,
this
wow.
is what they were doing. And so that's who we are told liberated Syria. It's just it's
Insane.
it's just beyond anything I could imagine. So
oh, guys, I'm going to add 2 more links now in the description video, one of which is the Substack of Dan, and the second is his website, uncaptured.media. So you can read his investigations as well, especially these 2 that he was mentioning. I will add all the relevant links. He already has his X account, but this is very important to follow him on these platforms or the website itself, so you can have the early access for the materials and the investigations he is publishing there. Dan, I'm very grateful that you came and shared your insight and wisdom with this audience of Syriana Analysis. I think we have to follow up, see how the ceasefire agreement will be implemented, what is going to happen next. This is very important. We will watch it, guys. So if you want to follow the updates on this channel, you know what to do. Subscribe to this channel. But then, thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevork. Thank you for all your hard work over the years and dedication. And we'll absolutely be in touch. I look forward to doing it again.
Definitely. And all the thanks also goes to the hundreds of people who watch this now live on Syriana Analysis. If you guys want to support the work I'm doing, simply just like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Tomorrow, I will be with Patrick Henningsen again at 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. We're going to discuss multiple issues, so make sure to tune in again. So we will see you soon, guys, tomorrow. Peace be upon you, upon your families, and peace be upon you, Dan, and to your beloved ones. Salam.